Hi, Megan. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I know we've been chatting over Instagram, so I'm glad we finally got to connect.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I know, like you said, we have been chatting, but I'm wondering first if you could just start off with giving an intro and telling everyone a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so a little bit about me. My name is Meagan Tehseldar. I am an autism advocate. I'm also an autism mom. So I have a 5-year-old daughter who is non-speaking autistic. And then I've also been in education for about 10 years, a little over a decade, working all the way from site level teams to state level teams. And my focus has always really been on inclusive education. So this is something I'm very passionate about. And so I kind of that's how I actually ended up starting Love Over Labels Advocacy, which is my advocacy organization, which is how we connected. So that's a
Yeah.
little bit about me.
Yeah, well, great. Thank you. And thank you so much. I mean, my son has been in special education since he was 3 years old. And we started with really early intervention. And I think that that has really helped him. And we've learned so much about him and his needs throughout, his 10 years in special ed. So I really appreciate all the work that you're doing. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
me and him have the same record. It sounds like we've both been working within special education for 10 years. Most likely he's advocating for himself. So yeah,
Yes.
sounds,
Yes.
he sounds like he's got it down.
We're still working a little bit on advocacy. And also now that he is a teenager, we're working through like some social anxiety issues and,
Mhm.
all of that, which I think also just comes with being a teenager, not so much just being
Definitely.
a teen with autism. So I also noticed on your Instagram profile that you have a link that, in addition to your apparel line, and as you mentioned, your nonprofit, you offer some coaching services. Is that correct?
I do. So I mostly work, they tend to be more local just based on actually like how much more helpful it is to have a physical presence.
Mhm.
But I can offer virtual coaching sessions as well. But usually, what kind of support I offer is I do like IEP consultations. I can go through drafts of IEPs and 504s, and then really just helping parents navigate the special education world. Really, when you first get that diagnosis, it's kind of like, here's your diagnosis, here's 3 pamphlets, good luck, and that's it. And so just having worked on like the more formal side of actual education and seeing it from that aspect and then seeing it from the parent side now as well, I was like, there needs to be somebody who can like bridge the gap, who's worked in both worlds, who's been in both worlds. Because it doesn't matter how long you've been in education, if you haven't been on that parent side, there's this like integral piece you're missing. And I do think those two things together are so important. So I do offer coaching, consultation, and then like moral support. Essentially, I'll go in and advocate in person in your IEPs for you and with you as well. And
Yeah,
that's
that's
all found on
awesome.
my website, so it kind of explains what all the different things are.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I think on one of your posts, you had talked about being an advocate for your child. And, you know, I do consider myself an advocate for my child, but also I have had to ask for help because I had a hard time navigating the school system and the school district. We would go through IEP meetings, and his teachers were all great and lovely. And I, thought that they were really supporting. So I've had to ask for help. And I think it's important as parents to know when it's always okay to ask for help because yes, you love your child and you can be their advocate, but there are also things that you just don't know through
Yeah.
navigating the school district. So,
I always think of it like I'm really good at arguing, but it doesn't mean that I would represent myself in a court of law just because that's not my specialty. Like
yeah.
I'm confident. I know what I want my end goal to be. I want to be innocent, whatever. But it doesn't mean that I would make a great lawyer just because I know what my end goal is. And so even me, I have a lot of background, I have a lot of training. And my mom is a special education leader now. She actually helps run a special education department for a district out in California. And I still go to her sometimes and I'm like, hey, this is something I'm struggling with. I can't figure this out. And I'm like, you have to have that touch point of somebody who every now and then you can just shoot them a text message and say, I have a quick question about this. And that is really what I love about social media is it's bringing so many people together with these quick conversations that we can have. And I do think it makes it feel a little bit less daunting to know that I could just reach out to this random Instagram mom and be like, oh, I love that your kid's doing that. What did you do? And
Mhm.
just have that instant connection. So it's so important for parents to feel confident in asking for help. Like it's okay to ask for help. We don't know everything.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why I really started this platform. And, it's more on like the fun side of things is I wanted to share my experiences that we've had in traveling because there's a lot of anxiety around traveling with a special needs child. And it is different, but different is not bad. And I wanted to share what that looks like and the possibilities. So, one of the things that you have on your services is that you offer social stories and you talk about social stories. And social stories are really important when it comes to traveling. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about social stories and maybe how you've used them either with some clients or your own daughter, and just your experience there.
Yeah, social stories are so helpful. And I think if you're new to the world of special needs and having special needs children, you might not be familiar with the word or like what it actually means, but it's literally just a story that kind of walks your children through a social situation and
Mhm.
it helps them see more concrete like timelines of what's going to happen. And I think for a lot of our children and honestly ourselves, that anxiety piece of being somewhere new, of having to do something we've never done before, it's so intimidating. And I try to think as well, like I have high anxiety. I get stressed traveling. Now imagine if I couldn't communicate
Mhm.
what my stressors were, or if I hadn't already been to the airport 800 times and knew how miserable it was. And so I always like, I mean, I think social stories are amazing for traveling, especially because they're stories that show the kids this is what we're going to do, this is how it's going to be done, this is what to expect. And it's really, if you've never seen a social story before, they're just little bite sized chunks of different events that are going to occur in specific orders and possible outcomes. So if you're getting on an airplane, the airplane is very noisy, but that's okay because, and so it really just prepares kids for what's coming. And honestly, as an adult, I wish like I look at the menu of a restaurant before I go there. To me, that's a social story. Like I'm like, I need that restaurant menu. It's really not like a foreign concept or something just for special needs kids. It's really for everyone, even adults. We like to plan itineraries and it's very similar. I think I
Yeah.
answered your question. I might have got off topic a little bit. Sorry.
No, you did. I think it's funny how you mentioned about like looking at menus. And I mean, I do think like you're saying a social story is really it's giving your child um that kind of like guidepost of here's what to expect. And I think it's
Yeah.
also nice with social stories because in all of this that I've been learning is sometimes there are some kids that don't like a lot of details, but they just like some basics. And I think it's nice that you can tailor social stories to as much detail or as little as your child may need.
Yeah, so I did I believe we were talking about the social story that I made for flying and I made that one specifically and I did put it public, but I usually don't make the social stories that I make for my daughter. I don't usually make them public because they are very individualized to what I know her needs are. And so that flying one, I knew that she needed all the details. And so I
Mhm.
made one for flying. It is public if you wanted to check out like what they could kind of look like, but that is something I work with my clients is if they are doing something new and they want a social story, that's part of being a consultant. And that's something we talk about in our initial meeting is like, what do you need? And that's something that I can do. I can create social stories tailored specifically to your child because every child has different triggers, every child has different things that might affect them. And so I think social stories are very personal. There's a lot that are general and vague, and that's awesome as well for a
Yeah.
starting point. But sometimes it's nice to just have one like for your baby that's specific for them.
Yeah, and you know your child best. Like you said, your daughter needed a lot of detail. And as we talked about, like there are some kids, like my son, he is a little bit older now. I think he needs just kind of the high level overview and the
Mhm.
basics. And it's just so nice that you can tailor those for their needs because I think
Yeah.
what's important about travel is you know your child best. what does your child need? What kind of support do they need? And then work with someone who can help guide you through that. So,
Yeah. I think
uh,
travel is like one of the most stressful things as well. So, traveling with a special needs child, that's exactly like you said, ask for help. That's something you might need help with because it's very overwhelming for the parents and for the children even more.
yeah, and there's a lot in going into prepping for travel with a special needs child. I think one of the things that I've been talking with people about is your first trip shouldn't be straight to like a Disneyland or a Walt Disney World. Like you have to kind of practice and lead up to it, because it is very overwhelming. So it's always good to kind of practice and start with some basics near your home. And these social stories, I think, are really good, like foundational basics that you can even create in going to like a local museum
Yeah.
or maybe you're driving into a larger city near you and what to expect, loud noises, trains, what that looks like, the amount of people. Um, how can you maybe pivot on a social story, or maybe you've created a social story and you've arrived at your destination and there are some unexpected changes or challenges in traveling? Is there something that maybe you can help support parents in um, maybe pivoting from the social story or creating a new social story once you're at your destination?
Yeah, so I think one of the beauties of technology is so many of our non-speaking children, at least, we use a lot of technology to support them in that communication. So, like, my daughter has an AAC device, and one of the things I try to do is I try to match up. I like create a little folder for different events. If we're like, we just flew to California. And it was her first time flying since she was like a baby. So it was really like her first flight. And she did get really stressed. And I realized I left out, I don't remember what part I left out, but I did leave out like a pretty serious component. Cause in my mind, I'm like, yeah, I go to the airport. That's a normal thing. Um, oh, it was getting on the actual plane, like the weird jump that you have to make
Yeah.
from the tunnel to the plane. And she was not about it. And because I had already created this little folder with her story, like with her little buttons, I had one that was like get on plane. So
Mhm.
the picture didn't match it, but once I started pressing the get on plane button, she was like, I hate this, but I have this secondary level of communication that I'm comfortable with. And so she was
Yeah.
able to kind of see how to do that. And so, like you said, it is a lot of prepping when you have a special needs child and you're traveling. And so the more prepared you are, the better. So I recommend for parents, if you know you're traveling and you already have a social story, create, like, depending on whatever the format is. If you have a concrete, like a paper AAC device that you use, create a secondary set with things that are specific to the event.
Mhm.
So if you did leave something out of the social story, you can be like, oh, I've got my individual words that I can help to create smaller sentences and smaller tasks, and those will help kind of weave into it. So it
Yeah.
is another task, unfortunately, that we're putting on parents. But I mean, you know your child, and for me, I'm like, I want to make sure I'm a type A. I'm over prepared. So I'm like, I got the folders, I got the papers. So I just always recommend like creating that secondary backup that might fill in any stock gaps that happen.
Yeah. I mean, I think that whether your child is on the spectrum or not, as a parent and traveling, you're always kind of thinking about contingency plans. So I think
Mhm.
it's just always good to always have a contingency plan for, whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish.
Because you could spill water on the social story and then all of a sudden it's gone, or your AAC device dies for some unknown reason and all of a sudden you're without this communication. So I like to really try and have two modes of communication and two modes of however I'm planning to get information across to her. I just like to have two on me at all times just in
Yeah.
case.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that this is also a good point to say that if you're traveling with a family member, have that other family member have a backup as well. Maybe you're with grandma or your spouse or a sister, whatever it is. It's good to kind of have the lean on those other people that are with you for help as well.
Yeah, delegate a little. That's
Yeah.
okay. Like moms don't have to do everything. Like
You don't have to
delegate a
carry the
little.
load. Yeah. Yeah. Are there any resources or tools that you can recommend for parents looking to create their own social story?
So it I use Canva. I like to think that I'm pretty tech savvy. So for me, I make my designs all in Canva because I like how movable it is. But you could even do something like PowerPoint. And then when you print it out, you can print it in 4 little blocks. There's no one set way to do it. You could even hand draw them. I've seen parents Google like comic book strips and then they put things in there. So there is no one set way to make a social story. It's really what you have on hand. And I think that's kind of the beauty of social stories is they're so flexible. But I also know there's a lot of free resources out there. If parents are looking for like ready-made ones, teacherspayteachers.com has a lot of free social stories and some that are paid. And then there's another website that I go to. It's called, I actually pulled it up before this so I could remember the name. And Next Comes L.
Okay.
And it's literally just that whole thing. And Next Comes L. And they have tons of free social stories and paid social stories as well. So I always just recommend for parents, if this is your first time, maybe go get some pre-made ones so you can see the formats and then use your own skill level and kind of identify where you can add on as needed.
Yeah, that's great. And any final thoughts that you have for parents in traveling and making a big jump in maybe flying on a plane for the first time? Any comments that you can share from your own experiences, or anything that we can kind of give parents as a takeaway?
Yeah. Jokingly but not jokingly, like if you have a psychiatrist, like reach out and be like, can I get some Xanax, like can I get something that chills me out, like ask for help. Like for me, I'm sure you can even tell from the way I talk and everything, I'm go 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 go, I need to chill out. So like I always know for my own mental health, like I have really bad anxiety, let me first take care of myself so then I can take
Mhm.
care of my children.
Mhm.
And so like get help from your doctor, get help from your spouse, prep your child, just really do all of the work up front. So by the time you get on the trip, you're only having to think about those contingencies and you're only
Yeah,
having to think about what's happening in that moment. Because there's nothing worse than not being prepared. And when you're not prepared, you're not going to have fun anyways. So I would rather have the misery of planning up front than the stress of planning in the moment. That's for me. So I recommend that for all parents. Ask for help, delegate, get everything done before you get in that car, before you pull out of the driveway. Everything should be done.
yeah. And I think, like you said, final thought is know when you need the support to ask for help,
Mhm.
delegate, and don't feel bad kind of giving those tasks to someone else, and prepare upfront. So,
Yeah. I like to make lists and then email them out to like myself and my husband, or I'll text out lists that are
yeah,
like, and again, if anyone's listening and is like, she's a lot, like, yes, I am. But it's because I know that that works for my family. We work really well
exactly.
with structure. Yeah. And so if structure stresses you out, then maybe go for something less structured. But for my family, we are a structured family, and that's how I know that we operate at our most efficient. So I just have to sit down like a week or so in advance and be like, this is what's going to happen on this day. This is what's going to happen on this day. And just really, I think a big part of it is knowing what works for your family. And so looking at your own dynamic and being like, what do I need to do for us?
Exactly. And I shared that yesterday on Instagram. It's, you know, not that anyone needs my permission, but as an autism mom, you have the permission to do what works for your family in the
Hmm.
way that works for your family. Your
Yeah.
vacation doesn't have to look like anyone else's. You may go somewhere and get there and spend 2 days in the hotel for the first 2 days because that's what works. You need to get
Hmm.
acclimated. You want to see what's around the hotel, whatever it is. You have the permission to do what works for your family because you know your family best.
Yeah, we just our trip to California. I was so excited. My daughter loves the water. I was like, we're going to be at the beach the whole time. We went to visit in-laws. They live about 5 minutes from the beach. We drove by the beach twice the whole trip. We were there for a week, and the rest of the trip, we spent 90% of the time in their backyard pool. And I was
Yeah.
like, they have a beautiful backyard. We're having fun. We're with family. Like, this is a good trip. We don't need to do 18 million things to have a good trip. And for us, it was one of our best vacations we've had in a long time because we didn't try to force any situations.
Mhm.
Um, and it worked out well. And we're lucky we have family that understands. We tried to go strawberry picking. We pulled up in, my daughter just immediately on her AAC device, more driving. And we were like, everybody get back in the car.
Yeah,
That's it. Like, you have to roll with what works for your family.
totally. Meagan, I really appreciate your time today. Where can people find you?
Yeah, thank you for asking. You can find me on Instagram at Love Over Labels Advocacy. And then also my website, which is more of like the formal side of it, loveoverlabels.net. And that's where I sell neuroforming wear, just like as a support system, get awareness out there about it. And then we also donate 50% of all proceeds to a different organization every month that supports autism and autism families. So you can find me those two places. And then if you go to either loveoverlabels.net or find me on Instagram, they have all my links to all of my offshoot accounts, because we have to have like 8 million things now. So all the
Yeah.
links are there.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Meagan. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Have a great day.